Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this Kratos Climate Change Beyond the Declaration webinar on Wednesday morning. It's great to have everybody with us, and there's more participants and that are trickling in now to join us. We've got a great team of panelists with us today, and we've got lots to talk about. So just before we do, I'll talk a little bit about Kratos and then who everybody is who's joining us for this really important debate. So Kratos is a dedicated advisory, public affairs, consultation and engagement company specifically working with and within local sector clients navigate the public sector, and we help local authorities themselves to improve. We do this sort of nationwide from offices in London, Southampton, Bristol, and joining me here in Manchester today. So if we can help, then please do feel free to get in contact with us. My name's Sean Anstey. I'm the Executive Director for Advisory, Public Affairs and PR at Kratos, and joining me is an esteemed panel to talk about the topics that we have today. Mark Jenkinson from Crystal Associates. Crystal are a specialist consultancy focused on climate and tech. Peter Sharrett from Foras, again a specialist consultancy in climate resilience and urban strategy. Mark and Peter will take us through a bit of a presentation to introduce the topic that we have today very shortly, and then we're going to have a discussion with James Birch, who's the Managing Director for Local Highways at Kia. Kia Highways are one of the UK's leading highway services provider, working closely with Highways England and local authorities across the UK. Councillor Diane Jones, the Cabinet Member for Climate Emergency at South Lakeland Council, up in the Lake Districts, beautiful part of the world by geography. I think the 11th largest local authority area in the UK, covering towns and villages including Kendal, Windermere and Ulverston. And then finally from Jason Torrance, the Policy Director at UK 100. UK 100 is a network of highly ambitious local government leaders who've all pledged to shift to 100% clean energy by 2050. So there's lots to talk through. After the presentation, I'll ask each of our panelists to give a bit of a view about what they think is the major opportunity on this topic versus what is the major channel. But to start us off, I'm going to move to Mark and Peter just to do some introductory remarks. And thank you for joining us this morning.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Thanks, everybody. Hopefully you can see the slides. Yeah, great. And hopefully I can move on to the next one. So what Peter and I are going to do is a bit of a double act, and we're going to take you through, we did a bit of a survey, but it just suddenly frozen. We did a bit of a survey from which some of the local authorities responded to, which is thank you much for that. And we're also going to take you through a bit of an analysis we've done on where local authorities are with regards to declaration and also regards implementation of the plan. And as part of the invitation, we're given 4 key questions, and we're going to cover those throughout the very short presentation. But if Lottie can actually just pull up the poll, we're going to do 3 question polls to the audience and also get your views. So if you could tell us, how important is the climate emergency to your organisation? And so basically just choose one. That would be great. Unfortunately, host and panelists cannot vote. So if you can do that, and then I don't know how the responses are coming in, but if we can see the results. Maybe we'll cover those. Whilst you're thinking of that, there are four areas that we were focusing on. So how do we best prioritise a green and just recovery? How do we actually turn these plans into action? It's okay having a declaration, but also we need to do the plan, and we also need to implement. What leadership is required, and how can local authorities be more innovative? And the whole point of today is that Peter and I will try and set the scene, set some provocations maybe, and hopefully the panel can discuss those shortly. So how do we prioritize? So here are some of the results. So thankfully, I think we're speaking to the converted, but obviously either very important, half of you, or important. And fortunately, nobody on the call said not important. So that's great to hear. So handing over to Peter. Peter's going to take us through what you've told us in the survey.
Okay, thanks very much, Mark. Well, the survey really wanted to frame up and provide a little bit of evidence for some of the themes and the topics. So first, I think, was the level of activity. Carbon had gone off the agenda for a little while and then came back with a shout in the last year, 18 months, with Greta Thunberg and various other initiatives. And so we've seen an awful lot of activity, and we just wanted to bracket where the delivery gap might be. So 30% of responses had declared an emergency, but not a plan. 30% had declared an emergency and a plan, and then 30% intend to issue a plan in the next 12 months. Or they are reviewing existing proposals, which I think is quite important, because some people are saying, well, we're not going to start from scratch again, we're going to really modify what we already have. 10% didn't know. So I think what we're expecting from this and other indicators, well, there would be a lot of activity leading coming in over the next year. And then I think jumping back up to the national scale, we've done some analysis here that Mark will just quickly talk through.
Yeah, so of the 404 principal local authorities in the UK, 283 have declared, so about 70%. And obviously there's been a flurry in the last year, last 12 months, so 2/3 of declarations have actually been in the last 12 months. 246 of the 283 have actually set net zero target dates, with 77% by 2030, so obviously ambitious goals. And but of all of that, we only have 48 plans, 30 full plans and 18 are draft. Now, fortunately, we have Diane here, who's one of the 30, but you can argue, and one of the questions is really, as well as being how do you turn these plans into action, is really, are we really going to achieve net zero by 2030 when less than 10% of local authorities actually have a plan already?
Okay.
Peter.
Then we wanted to know what were the actual climate issues that were affecting people, and these were really a combination. These were the issues that emerged as either that concerned or very concerned. 90%, number one, storms, so clear winner. Flooding and severe winters, 80%. Heat waves, 70%. Drought, 50%. Invasive species down at 40%. Now, clearly there's a geographic spread across this, with the sort of the north, northeast, northwest, down into the Midlands, sort of focusing more on the storms. London, southwest, clearly the drought and the heat waves were the kind of issues.
And on the right hand side, we've picked out the topics, the flooding and the heat, which I guess have specific focus for the planning community. So given that 1 in 6 UK properties are at risk, clearly obviously the planning community needs to consider where to build in the future and how to make sure that the current properties are safe, because the impacts are that businesses close, apparently up to 40%, and there's also obviously mental health impacts. And I think towards the end of the week we're going to have another bit of a heat wave, maybe not the Cambridge levels, but currently last year 900 people died due to overheating, mainly in their homes, and that's forecast to rise by 7,000. So basically, how do we make sure that our properties are actually cooled as well as heated?
Okay, now we were drilling a little bit into the prioritization issue. So the ability, having sort of understood the wider challenges and the public commitments, then we kind of really want to try and understand a little bit better the prioritization hierarchy, if you like. No surprise, COVID-19 came out as clearly the top priority over the next 12 months, followed by affordable housing. Equal third was then attracting investment and social care provision, closely followed by employability skills, transport, and interestingly, despite the polls that people say in terms of importance, in terms of priority, implementing the climate change plans came down a little bit less. So that was kind of a little interesting thing. This was telling us straight away that there will be resource challenges around implementing the plans. And I think the other thing that came out, 45% strongly agreed that a just and inclusive recovery is undeliverable given the current constraints. So I think there's a recognition of the importance of both the recovery and climate change, but signaling it to be a strong challenge to actually deliver it. Mark.
I think moving to the right hand side, this is one of many different depictions of, well, clearly COVID is a huge issue for us, and also the ensuing economic hit. But the general thinking is that clearly climate change and the biodiversity collapse, albeit maybe more medium term, will have an even bigger impact on us. But clearly, and I'm sure Diane will touch on this, but again, the other priorities of how do you deliver social care and all the other services that councils need to do on a day-to-day basis, how do you actually prioritise this? So I guess the next section was how do we turn these plans into action? So if we move on.
All right. So drilling down into some of the issues sitting behind the prioritization challenges, with the implementation challenges. So lack of budget came out by a long way. These, by the way, are comparative weighted averages. So there's a range of responses within these, but these are really telling us what the aggregated hierarchy was. So lack of budget, clearly the strongest, then followed by lack of in-house skills and expertise and lack of resources. And by that, we also put in the thing just sort of saying too busy on other priorities. So it's a time constraint as well. Insufficient powers to act. Then down at the very bottom were low priority among the local authority leadership and also political opposition or lack of consensus. So in a way, those two coming down really at the bottom are really quite positive, because we'd actually say, well, the leadership is pro and there isn't much political opposition to it either. So some of the traditional barriers to getting stuff done seems to be less of an issue for the survey respondents. But having said that, only 10% of respondents had a costed and funded action plan, although 60% aim to do so this year coming in the next 12 months. So we're kind of expecting a lot of activity, plenty to play for, and hopefully some of the conversations that may come out through this session may actually help inform some of the approaches or some of the strategies of the knowledge sharing.
And obviously one of the key challenges from COVID is the shortfalls that councils are facing, and this chart on the right is from a BBC survey of 173 councils. And okay, the government keep talking about the 3.2 billion that they've provided, but these the 173 suggested they would need another 3.2 billion. And unfortunately, at the top we see Birmingham. So Creatus' friend Chris Naylor obviously has a huge issue there. So how do you balance this shortfall issue with the need to invest in your action plan?
Okay, all right. Now, so funding is the challenge. We're kind of interested in just trying to do a little bit of high-level mapping on what were the main funding pathways for the climate action plans. So by far and away, the majority came out at council budgets, interestingly followed by private sector contribution. And then thirdly, government funding and grants, of which we heard a little bit on the previous slide. And then we were kind of interested in some of the more innovative funding structures, whether or not councils were looking at those, the idea around green bonds, increased charges, and we know a number of local authorities are doing that, but that may be a bit controversial in difficult times. Interestingly, the LEPs as a potential funding source actually came down really very low, and I think that's there's another slide we'll talk a little bit more about that. Legacy EU funding, and then crowdsource funding, nobody really thought they were looking at that at all. So that's the kind of the weighting of it. I think most people seem to be expecting, you know, to come out of existing budgets in combination with private sector contribution.
And just on the right hand side, just have two examples of you could argue innovative approaches. The one on the top right is in Nottingham, where back in 2011 they introduced the workplace parking levy. So for any companies over 11 parking spaces get charged £415 per space, and the money raised has gone into building a new station, supporting the tram network, and also new electric buses. Although apparently it's still the only workplace parking levy approach in the country. So I guess the question is, why is that? And on the bottom right is only last week, West Berkshire Council announced they were issuing the UK's first green bond, and this will go into solar panels for a number of houses. And this is for £1 million. But if you can contrast that to the EU green budget, which was announced last week, of 750 billion euros, apparently 500 billion of that will become from green bonds. So again, the question is our level of ambition, is that quite big enough? So leadership.
Yeah. So leadership, I think, is a key issue. We've already, all the survey respondents thought that the leadership were behind this within the councils. But we're kind of interested in really what were the drivers for local authorities taking action on this. The most dominant one was meeting public expectations, followed by leadership, i.e. it's just the right thing to do if you're in a position of responsibility to address that as an organization. Then meeting the expectations of business came sort of third, which is quite interesting if you remember, because business were going to be the second biggest source of funding the plan. What was quite interesting, right down at the very bottom, and we included these, were the driver meeting government targets. 50% of the respondents actually said, you know what, this is the least important driver for us doing this. And then meeting statutory or other obligation as well. So it seemed within this, the motivation for doing it was very much around leadership and also the voter kind of and constituency within which the local authorities operated. Mark.
Yeah, so on the right side, just a quote from a Ipsos Mori survey back in April, that 2/3 of Britons believe climate change is as serious as coronavirus. Whether that's still the case or not, but clearly, obviously, it was again interesting to hear the thoughts of Diane and the panelists on what is the public perception.
Okay, all right. Okay, now turning to the stakeholders, I think the clear issue is that councils and local authorities and so on can do and operate within areas of their strict control, but the question in terms of the wider stakeholders, how important are they, or how important do local authorities see them in delivering the plan? So these were the results. Respondents who said the most important stakeholder groups, 60% said business were, followed by 50% who said equally government, local community interest groups and residents were. This was quite interesting. Only 30% said that neighbouring authorities were the most important, and particularly when you think that climate change is no real respecter of boundaries and tends to operate on a regional basis, we were kind of interested by that. And then this again was surprisingly moderately important. 70% of respondents said the LEPs were actually moderately important in delivering their climate action plans. Mark.
And again, with regards, kind of two examples of leadership from business and say in government. The company I used to work for, Siemens, we pledged to be carbon neutral by 2030, which is one of the first companies to do that. But Microsoft have now recently pledged to be carbon negative by 2030, removing all of the carbon from the environment since it was founded in 1975. And then the bottom is obviously Alex Sharma, who's, well as obviously his day job, is also president of COP. So again, can governments play a leading role in this? Will COP26 actually inspire or help to get public on board and to actually focus some of the turning the plans into action? Unfortunately, on our question in the survey, COP26 wasn't seen as at all important. So how can the final bit, how can LA's local authorities be more innovative?
Okay, so again, we just wanted to sort of bracket this, and these are sort of really preference sentiments around it. So 90% thought that greater guidance and support was needed from central government. 80% thought that local authorities should collaborate more to develop regional responses to climate change. 80% again thought LA should collaborate more to develop, oh, we got that in twice. 80% thought that climate plans should adapt a standardized framework approach, possibly around UN SDGs. Interestingly, 70% thought that ecology and biodiversity had increased as priorities for LA and local authorities. 40% thought that local authority targets were more politically and voter driven than science-based. That was kind of interesting in relation to the skills and areas for possible thought. Nobody thought, and this was very surprising, nobody thought that technology or data would actually play a role in implementing, or a significant role in implementing the plans. So there was plenty to run out within the innovation space, not least of which, when you go beyond scope 1 and 2 emissions and you look at scope 3, the opportunity for local authorities to influence the value chain that they sit within have been estimated by the Committee on Climate Change to be about 40% of UK emissions. So there are kind of issues looking at sort of, you know, the impact investing that local authorities might do, tenanted properties, looking at sequestration opportunities. There's all kinds of areas sitting in this where we think there is room for innovation. There are a lot of tried and established routes going down on transport and so on, but we think there still is significant areas that could be developed. So that was a little bit of that. Mark, I'm conscious we need to.
Yeah. So I guess to summarize, and obviously I guess people can read this, but you know, this whole discussion, I think most webinars is obviously we can't afford to go back. So obviously instead we need to move forward beyond the declaration. Whilst you're reading that, it would also be good, Lottie, if you could just put up the final 2 polls. So given I'm focused on technology, I don't like the 0%. So first question is, how important is technology to a green recovery? So very important, fairly or not. And the second question is, which group should local authorities work with to tackle the climate emergency? Select one. So business, residents, UK government, or LEPs. And based on that, I will hand back over to Sean and the panel.
Well, Mark and Peter, thank you very much for that huge amount of information, which I think is going to help frame the context for the discussion that we have right now. And so to start with that, I was going to ask Jason at UK 100 just to perhaps comment on what you think the biggest challenge and opportunity is, but also maybe explain a little bit around that leadership question that is clearly coming from local authorities, given what UK 100 does, your experience of engaging with them, and what you think of what we've just heard.
Hi, Sean. Thank you very much, and thank you for everyone that's taken the time out to join this webinar, and clearly a critically important time that we're living through at the moment, and a real opportunity to tackle the greatest challenge that we all face, you know, the climate emergency. So I think what we've seen over the last few months is of course of a scale that none of us 6 months ago or so would have dared to even think could be a reality, and many devastating consequences have befallen communities, families, etc. And I think it's worth just understanding in terms of the context that we're facing in, and I'm sure we'll hear from Councillor Jones the very real impacts on the ground to local authorities and the budgetary challenges that local authorities are now under. So I think there are some real constraints. But I think in terms of opportunities, you know, we still see public opinion for taking ambitious action on climate change and the climate emergency as very high, despite the coronavirus and public health crisis that we have. And I think we have an opportunity going forward towards the spending review, where in the autumn the government must be prioritising investment to support local action around climate, as well as supporting local authorities to carry out their everyday business and their statutory obligations. And I think what's really missing at the moment, what we hear from our members, we have 100 local authorities as part of our network, and we provide secretariat at the moment for a resilient recovery task force that's looking to share best practice and inform government decision making around the spending review. Is that there are, of course, a whole number of fantastic activity that's being delivered by local authorities on the ground, but there is no national framework. There is no national measuring by central government. There are no obligations placed on national government, local government for local delivery, and there must be a deal really between local authorities and central government, a partnership that quantifies what local authorities need to do, what government need to do, and what business needs to do in partnership. And without that framework, without that financial support, without that political and policy framework, we're just going to be continuing with lots of bespoke and individual actions and no concerted effort, which is desperately what we need.
Jason, thanks very much for that. James, I wonder whether from your perspective, one of the things that we've just heard, both in Jason's comments, but also in the presentation, was that business is very important to local authorities in sort of dealing with this, and has a huge role to play. So, but one of the things that local authorities are most nervous about is not having the in-house skills to be able to do this. So I wonder whether you might reflect perhaps on that conundrum and share a little bit about what Kira are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So from our point of view as Kier, so within the local highways business, we work with a number of local authorities delivering their highway services. And what we're finding certainly is that the climate change agenda, and in turn sort of sustainability and environmental management, and how we manage our road networks, how we manage our footprint on the environment, and what we do to change the way we work in our business is really sort of ramping up the agenda. So certainly talking to our local authority clients, and when we're looking to bid new work, we kind of put it in a position of safety has always been our license to operate on the network, but I think environmental sustainability, and in turn supporting climate change and supporting the climate action plans with our clients, is really our kind of sort of operating manual for growth. So if we don't change, if we don't evolve, we'll be left behind. And we're certainly finding that a lot of the work we're doing and a lot of the bids we're working on, the climate change agenda is really high up on the list of priorities, and we need to make sure we're part of that. So for us, it's no good to just wait and see what environmental change, legislative changes are made around how we should act, what technology we should bring in. And interesting to see that technology didn't feature high up, but I think there's a real place for looking differently. And for us, I think there's a big opportunity when we talk about opportunities and blockers. I think the big opportunity in the private sector is for us to sort of really build on that private public sector collaboration. So we talk about skill shortages and in-house capability, and the blocker I put on that was really around managing data and having the resource to do so, to make decisions and to change the way we work. So I think one of the offerings that we're looking to pull together as part of our sustainability framework and our response to the climate agenda is to look at what we can do differently, how we can support our local authority clients, and what we can bring to the table. Because I think if we're not innovative and if we don't change the way we work, then we're not really offering much to our clients. So there's a whole big piece around how we do that, whether it's in how we design road schemes, whether it's in how we look at new materials and sustainable resources, whether it's our drive for carbon neutrality. We just need to make sure that we're part of the solution, really. And I think with a collective approach across the industry and working with bodies sort of ADEPT and LCRIG, CIHT and the like, we can be part of the solution, and we need to be. So that's certainly where we are. I mean, in terms of my role, I look after our local authority business, but I'm also our sustainability champion or executive sponsor across the whole of the highways business. So it is something we're really sort of invested in. So, I mean, there's different levels of granular detail, but if you take it from the sort of the real ground level, we're looking at a lot of trials, certainly working with Surrey County Council at the moment around having a carbon neutral delivery model. So we've got a trial on a scheme down in Surrey at present where all of the plant machinery and small tools are electric or alternative fuels. Now that's kind of small fry, but it's a step in the right direction. And I think if we can do that, if we can review the success of that, have a look at what it's cost versus more traditional delivery methods, and work in what we need to do to change that and make it more scalable, all the way up to sort of our approach to agile working. I think coronavirus, if you take some of the positives out of that, with regard to business travel, again, they're all small things that will contribute to tackling climate change, but we've certainly found that reducing business mileage, more use of Teams and Zoom to undertake meetings, and that ethos has really sort of driven through from our clients as well. Certainly up in Suffolk, they've got no rush to get back to office and work the way they previously worked. There's very much a focus on the new norm and how small changes can contribute to that, and I think we as a private sector need to be part of that as well.
Totally agree, and it's a really interesting, James, thanks for that. It's a really interesting view, actually. I mean, so in my local authority experience, we used to sort of say, are we, you know, if you focus on the massive prize at the end, do you forget that you can do the small things along the way that actually help you get there? And that's an interesting point, hopefully, for us to explore a bit further as we go through the conversation. But I want to move to you, Diane, if I can. Thanks for really. Cabinet member for climate change. I think you were one of the first in that dedicated portfolio position. So maybe just a bit of a view on that. And in South Lakeland, obviously, this is a huge priority for you for many reasons. But I suppose a little bit on that point of how do you keep it a priority? How do you make sure against all these other competing factors that you've got as the local authority to do? What does it feel like in South Lakeland, and what's your view on some of the things that we've heard so far?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. It's a multitude of feelings, really. One of the things that we're facing at the moment is reorganisation. So that's a big challenge because it shifts everybody's focus away from this very topic. So yeah, we were at the beginning of 2019. We were the first district. So there's 6 districts within Cumbria, and we're quite small, really. So when we started talking about this and we declared the emergency back last year, a lot of people thought we were bonkers, and we didn't put a date on it then. We didn't put a target on it. We've only just done that. But the work towards an action plan has been going on since then. And I've been really fortunate enough. We siphoned some money away from economic development because there wasn't a lot of that going on at the time. And it paid for an officer, a dedicated officer. And without that dedicated officer, we wouldn't have really achieved anywhere near what we've done. But she's only on a short-term contract. And I'm conscious now that with all this shrinking and money and needed in all these other areas, that they won't continue a contract. So that is a priority for me. It's nuanced. I was just looking at all your data and your statistics, your percentages. It's really nuanced, and that generalisation, that average thing, I was trying to work out where we fit in there, because we've got 2 national parks within our boundaries that were doing their own thing, but then we're inundated with visitors, the visitor economy, which is on its knees at the moment, of course. And so the demand is for people to come back and spend the money in visitors, but at the same time, I'm kind of like, no, please don't come with your dirty cars. And, you know, I mean, of course, not all cars are dirty, but the shift has changed to quite rightly, I think, to building back the economy. But at what cost? Because are we going to get to a tipping point where it just all becomes statutory and mandatory and it's taken out of the hands of local authorities? I do wonder, because that it's a bit like when they stopped people smoking in pubs. We didn't like it, but it happened. And I wonder whether we'll get to a point where some of these things just become legislated. You know, we want to change a car parking structure, but of course that will lose votes. I'd like to see people who park in the centre of town have clean vehicles, so it's cheaper. But of course, then you've got inequality. I'm a Lib Dem. I should really. You may well have worked that out by now, but so Of course, but then I've got the finance portfolio saying, no, we can't do that. We need people to come to town, and we need the money. Car parking's where we get a revenue from. So it's all this kind of, and the part of me wants to just get my Enid Blyton book out and read quietly in the corner. You know what I mean? It's really tricky just saying, no, actually we need to put this before anything else. We've got a housing list, waiting list is huge, because we've got people who come in, suck up all the houses in the park, and then have them as holiday homes or on short-term lets, you know. So we've got lots of big issues to deal with, and although this underpins everything we do in terms of sustainability and moving forward and being future-proof, it feels like it's going to keep being swept to the side because it's very qualitative. It's not bricks and mortar, that kind of, I mean, it is in terms of installing electric vehicle charges and that kind of stuff, the whole hardware of it all, but actually the emotional kind of, the impetus to do something soon gets lost in cabinet meetings. And I think that's probably going to be inevitable for a lot of authorities, small authorities like ours. Now, if we end up, it's not devolution, it's reorganisation. If we end up with, so we're looking at a footprint, a Morecambe Bay footprint, where we've got Barrow, which has a lot of poverty, you know, deprivation, however you want to describe it. But then we've got Lancaster, that's very innovative, a good student base. Maybe things will start to look different. But in that mix, I represent a really rural ward. Windermere is right in the heart of the lakes. And I just wonder whether it'll change anything in terms of a carbon footprint in the Lake District. So all those things are going on. And like I say, get me a library book. I'll be sitting in the next room having a cup of tea. You know, put the kettle on, keep your head down. I mean, you've got to shout about the climate because it doesn't seem to be at the top of people's priorities for many reasons at the moment. You know, the pandemic's left us with an ugly scar. It's probably going to come back and affect us until there's a vaccine, a good vaccine programme. Meanwhile, the clock's ticking. You know, now we've only got 8 years to do something. Now we've only got 7 years. My big sort of, it's not a conflict, but people say to me, but why 2030? But it's not a promise. It's not a promise. And this is the thing about being a politician. People don't always believe you or think you're believable. So I kind of go, no, I'm actually speaking, I want to speak the truth here. I want to tell you that we've put this date on, but we can almost ignore it. I mean, it's a bit of a contradiction. It's a bit of a funny thing, but it's like, there's a date there that we're aiming towards, but it might not happen. But it's not the end of the world. We've just got to keep doing what we can. That's why we put a year on, because we found we were just floating around doing this and that, and it didn't really engage other people with an urgency. But it's that pulling everybody together to be on the same page at the same time, heading in the same direction, that's the real challenge, because everything seemed to be quite fragmented. Yeah, the nuance of it, the challenge of it all, yeah. You know, the liminal thing. Yeah, thanks.
Well, Diane, you're off to a great start in South Lakes, and are actually further ahead than many of the other local authorities that we spoke to. Just before we perhaps reflect on some of those comments, I'll just remind everybody who's watching that we have a Q&A facility, so do feel free to send questions or comments to the panel, and we'll make sure that we get to them. I've seen a few already, so I'll get to them in just a second. But Jason, I wonder whether, just thinking about Diane's comments there around the inherent conflicts and tensions that exist in policy priorities that local authorities face, and clearly the pandemic is very real and it's very now, and it's driving a lot of change, and perhaps the same it cannot be said for the climate emergency, because whilst it's real, it might not feel now. So how do you get your network of local authorities who, you know, the 100 that have committed to work with you, to really keep this up high on the priority, on the list of priorities, and then bring people with them, work with others, and share best practice?
So I think you know, as Councillor Jones mentioned, you know, local politics is hard. There's many different priorities, but political leadership is critical. And I think one thing that people around the country councillors, local leaders, officers understand is that we are living through an extraordinary time. We have a once in a lifetime opportunity now to build back better, to renew our economies. And we have some big moments ahead, and I think it's worth just reflecting on some of the big moments ahead that we have. We have the spending review coming up in the autumn. Central government must be making some important decisions that support local authorities, provide a national framework, and really prioritise this opportunity. And I'd just say, there's some important things for central government to do and to invest in. Green Investment Bank, for instance, or supporting the filling of the skill shortage that evidently we have if we're ready to build a green economy. But also, I think there's some things that government need to stop doing. And I think one of those would be continuing to invest 27 billion in a national road building programme and look to support local improvement of local roads or local economy. So I think there are some choices. I think secondly, of course, we have the largest set of elections, I think, in half a century coming up in May next year, where some people in the UK will be voting in 5 elections. So local politics is important, but of course national politics is equally important, because some of those politicians now that are really committed to taking local action on climate sadly may not be there in May. So I think my third point really is that there must be a national framework, a partnership between central and local government that enables, requires action and really quantifies what needs to happen and requires a pathway towards those reductions in the shortest time available. Because without a national plan, a national deal between central and local government, and I don't think it's as black and white as central government telling local authorities what to do. I think it has to be a deal, but there must be a national framework backed up with resources and support. We're stuffed.
Well, hopefully that won't be the case, and that continues to. Yeah, I mean,
sorry to be so negative.
Well, I mean, what we wanted to do today was have a bit of a conversation about what we think the challenges are, and there's a couple of questions that are starting to come through. So let's just try and take some of these in order. So the first one, I think maybe Mark or Peter, you might want to answer this, is where we've sort of spoken to local authorities. There is that difference between local authorities and councils as organisations and what they do for their own climate emissions and what they produce, versus leaders of place and what they do to try and encourage their communities and businesses that are working within their geographies. So do we know, or do we have a view anywhere about where councils are acting as an organisation or where they're acting as an institution, and what they're doing with their own emissions within their own operations? So that's that first question. If you have any thoughts on that.
Oh.
And we're struggling a little bit, Mark, to hear you.
This could be why.
Ah, there we go.
I guess it'd be a good question to put to Diane as well, but I think there are a number of councils which they have kind of 2 targets. One is to get their own house in order, and then the other one is actually focused on the geographical area in which they're in. So that's the quick answer.
Yeah, and I think there are many And it may be a case that, you know, there's been an overemphasis on what we'd call the immediate emissions, and probably less that we've seen in the ability to influence around. So you've just got to look at, you know, planning policy, for instance, you know, and trying to raise the bar on that. So, and again, that's very difficult because we've had the presumption in favor of development. We've just had, you know, kind of government announcements in relation of relaxing planning control in favor of growth and economic infrastructure development. So it puts, I think, councils in a very difficult position. But I think those are where some of the biggest wins are. I would think if you were going to look at a carbon balance sheet, those would probably be where they would sit in my view. And then I think the other key thing that we didn't get much feel of, and Jason, we completely agree with your point about the lack of a consistent methodology and approach, and how these plans can relate and talk to each other. So you can begin to see what would be the regional aggregated effect of the plans. So they're not just within the jurisdictional boundaries, but, you know, you get transport between people. And we saw this probably more with, you know, for example, GAM and some of the, you know, the bigger consolidated authorities. So, you know, I think there's opportunity there, but I think underpinning it is the devolution debate. You know, it's sort of, yes, partnership with government, but, you know, can we have better control of localized budgets, localized decision, and creating those kind of regional based plans that actually bring consolidation of effort. And I think that's probably the area that we get the feeling there could be a stronger spotlight put on that.
Great. Diane, you wanted to, I think, come back to some of that.
Yeah, one of the things that I find really frustrating, because you kind of alluded to it a little bit there, Peter, is we had a full council last night, and I find myself in this really reactive stance about most things, to the point where my group colleagues are messaging me saying, be quiet, you know. But the housing thing is a big deal for us. I've mentioned it earlier. It's this politicising of all the issues that actually are going to benefit all the residents. So what we end up with is a bun fight, in effect, in our council meetings at the moment. While all this stuff's going on, we've got, I've only been doing this for a few years, and in that time I've seen this sort of degradation to a conversation about a topic that's important, that is going to benefit all of our electorate, whoever they vote for. And it's really frustrating, because you just go around in a talking shop where you're scoring points with one another and don't make any progress. And I've got to a point where I just think, I'll just shut up, put my vote in, switch my computer off, and let the rest of the world outside of politics manage the problem. You know, people who don't have a political interest, you know, like you for instance, James, you know, you're an independent organisation that gets what we want to achieve, but doesn't get into the politics of it all. Because I just find it doesn't work. The way that we councils are set up, and the systems just don't seem to work like they did. I don't know what you think, Sean, because you're a councillor, aren't you?
Indeed, yep, I am, and not for much longer though, hopefully. James, maybe just link to what Diane was saying, and one of the questions that we've had. So you work with authorities of different shapes and sizes and in different geographies and parts of the UK. So there's a question around local authority reorganisation, which I know is key to your business, but you know, how do you find it working with these authorities and you know, getting this up the list of priorities, especially when COVID and climate is on the list?
So I think for me, the key for local authorities, and the biggest thing they can do, and I'll give a direct example of where it's been successful in a second. The key is that the local authorities need to use their influence to pull together the whole value chain to affect change. So the reason that we in Kier Highways have set net zero carbon on scope 1 and 2 emissions of 2030 is because our clients and our prospective clients are telling us that's what they want. So and I get that the highways, as much as it's probably the biggest asset a local authority owns, when we talk about climate change and housing and alternative power and all that kind of stuff, it doesn't pale into insignificance, but my part of the world can only affect so much change. But what we are doing, and where I think the local authorities have been successful, certainly in awarding contracts in my part of the world, i.e. highways maintenance and improvements, is around being clear on what their objectives are. So for example, Transport for London, we're working with Transport for London. They've been very clear on what their expectations of us are. Similarly, Surrey and Shropshire and other authorities we work with, we've based a lot of our sustainability approach, our One Planet Action Plan, and our objectives and targets based on one, as a business, we need to do that to succeed moving forward. But more importantly, we've been kind of coerced down that road, if that's the right word, because there has been such a strong intent from local authorities that we work with and we wanted to work with. So we're at the stage now where, when we were bidding contracts 2, 3, 4 years ago, having an electric fleet was seen as innovative. Having an electric fleet now is just seen as, well, if you're not doing that, we don't even want to talk to you. So there has been that whole evolution from the local authorities in terms of what they expect from us. And that drives us to be more innovative, and that drives us to change as well. And now we're in a position where, as I said before, we're not just waiting to be told by local authorities what they want, but we're trying to offer them what we think they need as well. And that's because that collaboration exists. Now, whether that collaboration exists because we're in a bubble in the highways industry or not, I don't know. But certainly from the effect that we are seeing in the way we manage our business and the way we adapt and change, and through to our supply chain as well, that's driven by what the local authorities are telling us they need us to do. So I think there is a good trajectory, but I take your point, Councillor, around pressing priorities, housing, resources and everything else. But I think there's positivity to be had, certainly in the sort of the world that we work in, around really making an impactful change. I'm not sure that answers the question completely, but that's kind of the thoughts on where we are as a business.
And thanks, James, for that. And Jason, thinking about your membership at UK 100, so there's a question about what's a single change or power that would influence that would be most beneficial for local government, and maybe just think about that. But we know that there's reorganisation discussions that are kicking off in Surrey, in Lincolnshire, in Herefordshire, in Cumbria. In terms of being able to, is bigger better? Is it easier to be able to get the policy changes that you want? Or is local authorities easier to work with when there are fewer of them? What's your view on that in terms of how UK 100 is operating, wants to see local authorities have powers in the future?
So I think in terms of the challenge, post-COVID crisis that we face as a country and local authorities face, and the much larger international global crisis that we face around climate change, I think the only answer is for a number of big solutions to be put in place. I think over successive years we've seen an inability to really grapple with the issues, and generally climate emissions are not falling, and in some cases, like transport emissions are rising. However, I think there is hope on the horizon. I think public opinion and desire from local authorities is higher than it's ever been before. But I think in terms of powers that local authorities need, I think there's a real difference, and what we hear from our members, and I think local authorities generally are very vocal on this. There's a difference between the power that local authorities need for more devolved decision making, more generally, to serve the communities that have voted for them in a better way, in a bottom-up way, rather than a top-down or number 10 telling them what to do. And I think that's a broad change that needs to happen. But I think more specifically in terms of powers, I think really it comes to me back again to that partnership which is missing between local authorities and central government, that requires a single set of data, that requires a single unified response, and is supported by a national framework that says this is your priority, this is our priority as a country, central government, businesses, local authorities, and these are the steps going forward. And I think that partnership going forward, and just one last thing, I think there's it's no secret really why things like the workplace parking levy in Nottingham hasn't been taken up more readily around the country, or why clean air zones aren't more prevalent around the country, or why congestion charging isn't taken up around the country. It's not because local authorities don't have the power to do that, because they do have the power to do that, but they don't have the central government support, the central government funding, and implementing these things locally is bloody hard, and needs a national and local combined response to actually get these things moving and sell them and get them implemented with the consent of local people.
Jason, thanks for that. And I'm certainly battle scarred from tough decisions that local politicians have to take. And Diane, I mean, you're smiling, but I just wonder whether you might want to give a short reflection on just the politics of doing some of this sort of stuff. Because, like I said, you have you are in a one of the few dedicated climate change cabinet positions, and you've sort of commented a little bit, but what's the thing that you're most proud of, I suppose, in South Lakeland that you've been able to do in posts that you are happy with, and that might be best practice for others to share?
Yeah, I think, that's a tough one. Because my portfolio was, yeah, thanks, John. We're like a challenge, don't we? My portfolio used to be environment, because actually, as an authority, what we really are is the delivery arm of local authority. We like to punch above our weight, and people think we're actually can do more than we're really statutory obliged to do. So just as a bit of history, I guess, my environment portfolio became the climate thing with localism. So all the front-facing stuff, the bins and the dog poo and all that kind of stuff went to somebody else as customer service kind of element of their portfolio. And that's when I got an opportunity to get a dedicated officer. It's like having a PA. It's amazing, actually. She's really good. And I guess that's the proudest thing, because her action plan, that I can forward to you. You can share that with everybody. In fact, I could share it on the screen if we had time. It's really good. It has come about because of Hannah, and there's a team. We've got a green board which is made up of officers with a different skill set from across the authority. We've got specialists and project managers and caseworkers, and internally, Hannah's creating this COP group, Action Network, I think it's called. And they're all innovative things within the officer bed. But of course, what people on the outside, what the voters want to see is big projects and stuff, great big, which we're not going to do that because we don't have the money. We don't have the resources. Like you were saying, Jason, there's no framework to follow to do any of that. And actually, Kendal, where South Lakeland District Council is based, has got a large population of very smart, well-intended retirees who take a great lot of the time in informing us about what we should be doing and what they want us to do and all that, which is great, but it just ups the ante in terms of actually remaining in office kind of thing. So it's that tricky balance, and we've done the climate conversation things. I know we've talked before, Jason and I joined a thing last week about the climate assemblies. We didn't do climate assemblies, we did conversations, and we've raised like we haven't raised, they were already there, but we've encouraged a group of people who are actually turning into middle-aged activists. They're not part of Extinction Rebellion or anything in particular, but they've now begun to realise, oh, that's why they're not building houses, and that's why they're doing it this way, and that's why they can't do that. Because it's surprising how people don't join up the dots, even retired academics. Unless you're in it, like me and you are, Sean, or anybody else who might be a counsellor, the little nuances and the connections are difficult to understand. So, I mean, I think, what was your question? I'm rambling, sorry.
No, I think what we've heard, Diane, is
I'll shut up if I've answered. I'll go on and on.
You totally have answered it, and that is about. I think actually to conclude, because we're up at 9:30 now. It's what we've heard from everybody is a wealth of information about knowledge and awareness of this issue, and need to be able to do something about it. But in order for that to work, there has to be a concerted effort, not just from local authorities, but from everybody in the supply chain, as James has referred to. And that's going to take a bit of a resilience in decision making. There's going to be some tough decisions along the way that people are going to have to take in order to make progress on this, because turning from concept and theory and declaration into actuality and reality is the next stage. And we could talk about this for hours and hours on end. And hopefully what we're going to do here at Kratos and with everybody on the webinar, and thank you for everyone for joining us, is to continue this discussion in the months ahead, so that we can explore some of the subtopics in a lot more detail. So, I mean, I suppose that just leaves me to conclude to say thank you to Diane, to Jason and James for joining the panel today. It's really appreciated. On behalf of Foras, Crystal and Kratos, we hope you've enjoyed listening to us. And I think the screen is just going to finish in a minute when we're done. So enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you very much for joining us.